The sound of my son's frantic breathing was the last thing I heard before the world tilted sideways. One moment, the cool evening air of Queens was a gentle caress on my face, and I was admiring the dizzying, man-made canyon before me. A massive construction pit, its depths a chaotic maze of jagged rebar and unforgiving concrete. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and freshly poured cement, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban street we had just left. A brutal, powerful shove came from behind, a force I had never known in my 75 years of life, and it sent me flying. It was a push born not of anger or a moment of madness, but of a chilling, cold desperation that froze my blood. My mind, still reeling from the betrayal, didn't have time to process the sight of David's face, contorted with a mixture of terror and finality. All it registered was the terrifying emptiness below, a perfect, man-made tomb. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic little bird trying to escape its cage as the ground disappeared from under my feet. I was falling, a powerless weight in the rushing darkness. Just as the pit's blackness rushed up to swallow me whole, an enormous, calloused hand shot out and clamped down on my arm, the fabric of my old winter coat straining against its incredible grip. I was pulled back with a violent jolt, safe on the edge once more. But as I scrambled to regain my footing, my knees weak with shock, a desperate, guttural shriek tore through the night. The sound belonged to my son, David, and it was a cry of pure, agonizing terror as his own feet, on the now slippery, treacherous ground, betrayed him. He was the one who fell, plummeting into the very pit he had meant for me, a final, chilling twist of fate that sealed his own downfall. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel and press that bell icon so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. My name is Shirley, and for 75 years, I've called the same little brownstone in Queens, New York, my home. It's not much to look at from the outside, a modest brick facade with a small, manicured front garden where my late husband, Thomas, used to spend his weekends, his hands stained with soil and a gentle smile on his face. But to me, it was everything. It was the place where Thomas and I had built a life, where we had a garden filled with the roses he had planted, and where every floorboard held a memory of our shared existence. I worked as a librarian for over 4 decades, a quiet but deeply fulfilling life filled with stories, and my modest pension combined with the fact that I owned the house outright meant I had all I needed. My greatest joy was watching my only son, David, grow up within these walls. He was a bright, ambitious boy who grew into a man with a mind for big things, a mind that always seemed to be 2 steps ahead of everyone else. He was the first in our family to go to business school, and he started his own real estate development company right out of college, armed with nothing but a loan and a whole lot of charisma. He had a way with people, a smooth talker who could convince anyone to believe in his grand vision, and for a long time, his vision was a reality. He built enormous glass towers in Manhattan and the surrounding boroughs, and his name was always in the papers and on the news. I was so proud of him, a little bewildered by the scale of his success, but proud nonetheless. But the unyielding pressure of success changed him. The high-stakes deals, the ruthless competition, and his relentless need to keep up with the city's billionaires transformed him into a man I barely recognized. The sweet-natured boy I had raised was buried under layers of financial stress and insatiable greed. His latest and most ambitious project was the luxury condominium complex that would cover an entire block, and the last remaining obstacle was my little brownstone. He had a lucrative offer for me, a truly absurd amount of money from the investment group he was working with, but I simply couldn't bring myself to sell. "David, honey, this isn't just a house to me," I would tell him, my voice filled with a familiar sorrow. "It's the only place I have left of your father. It's the memory of him, the memory of our life together. The money, it's not worth it." My refusal became a constant point of tension, a chasm that widened between us with every passing day. He'd come over, his face a mix of frustration and forced patience, his slick suit feeling out of place in our cozy living room. He'd talk to me about zoning laws, property deeds, and the immense amount of money he would make, all a blur of financial jargon that meant nothing to me. But the desperation in his eyes was crystal clear. His company was failing. The grand project was hemorrhaging money, his investors were pulling out, and he was on the verge of bankruptcy. My little house, my sanctuary, was the last thing standing between him and total financial ruin. To him, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just a stubborn obstacle, an old building with an even older owner in the way of his last shot at salvation. The threat started subtly, a mention of his lawyers, a veiled warning of a lawsuit, and even a claim of eminent domain. But I knew those were empty threats. He was just a drowning man grasping at straws, and his patience had finally run out. He called me that evening with a strange, sugary sweetness in his voice that set off every maternal alarm bell in my head. He started the conversation not with demands, but with a question about my health, my day, my roses, the way he used to when he was a boy. "Mom, I've got a surprise for you," he said, his voice brimming with a feigned excitement. "I want to show you the progress on the construction site. Just for a quick walk. I think you'll be impressed by the new foundation." I was hesitant, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The sweetness was a costume he wore now only when he wanted something, but my heart, still clinging to the memory of the sweet boy he used to be, pushed aside my suspicion and said yes. I put on my old winter coat, the one Thomas had bought for me decades ago, and met him at the end of the block. We walked side by side, a chilling silence growing between us as we left the familiar warmth of our streetlights behind. The night air was thick with the scent of wet earth and concrete, a foreboding fragrance that seemed to cling to everything. The massive construction pit loomed ahead of us, a truly immense chasm that seemed to swallow the light and the silence alike. It was a wound in the earth, a gaping, brutal scar where the life I had known was being torn away and replaced with something cold and metallic. David led me to a high point on the edge, a precarious ledge of loose gravel and dirt where we could look down into the void. The wind whipped at my coat as I stared into the darkness below. It was an intimidating sight, a chaotic maze of jagged rebar and unforgiving concrete. "Look, Mom," he said, his voice a low, intense whisper. He didn't sound like my son anymore. He sounded like a stranger, a desperate man on the brink. "This isn't just a pit. It's a new beginning. My life is right there at the bottom of it." He gestured with a frantic wave of his hand, as if his salvation was buried beneath the rubble and steel. I turned to him, my heart aching with a familiar sorrow. My hand reached for his arm, but he flinched away. "David," I said gently, "your life is right here with me. It's not about the money, son. It's about us. You can still come back." That was the moment the mask fell entirely. His face, which had been a picture of frantic yearning, hardened into a chilling, blank expression. His eyes were empty of all the warmth and love I had once known. His hands, which had been in his pockets, came out and a brutal, merciless shove slammed into my back. "Then you won't be in my way anymore," he snarled, the words a terrible, final punctuation to his act. The world spun, and I felt myself falling forward, the gravel and dirt crumbling under my feet. There was no time to scream, only time for a single, final prayer as the ground disappeared from under me. My body tilted over the edge, the cold air rushing up to greet me. It was a feeling of pure, absolute helplessness, a visceral terror that turned my blood to ice. My feet were no longer on solid ground, and my hands grasped at the empty air. I was nothing but a falling weight, a mere object obeying the unyielding laws of gravity. In that split second, I knew that this was the end of my story. The narrative of my life, a quiet librarian, a devoted wife, a proud mother, was about to be snuffed out in the darkness below. But as I tumbled, something profound happened. A strange, unearthly peace began to wash over me, a feeling so immense it transcended the fear that should have consumed me. The loud, frantic hammering of my heart grew still. The world around me, which should have been a blur of speeding darkness, seemed to slow. The chaotic rush of wind and the terrifying roar of the abyss softened, replaced by a gentle, comforting silence. It was as if time itself had stopped just for me. In that profound stillness, in the space between my heartbeats, a voice, a pure and gentle whisper, echoed in my mind. It was not the voice of David or of anyone I knew. It was a voice filled with a perfect, boundless love, a voice that was both ancient and new, and it carried with it a power that defied all human understanding. "Fear not, Shirley," it said, "I have sent help." The words were a command and a promise, a divine assurance that was already being fulfilled. My fall was still a fall, but it was now a guided one, a slow, gentle descent that felt as if I were being held in a profound spiritual embrace. I had given up on my own strength, but in that moment of surrender, I felt a new kind of fortitude, a divine power that was not my own, a presence so palpable and real that it felt like an actual hand holding me. It was the same peace I had felt in the moments before my husband Thomas had passed, a serene calm that came with a deep and unwavering sense of grace. I remembered his hands, how they had felt in mine, and in that moment I felt a presence so similar, yet infinitely more powerful. The air around me grew warm, and I felt a subtle shift, a pull that was not downward, but outward and upward. The rush of wind became a gentle breeze, and the terrifying void below was no longer a threat, but a silent witness to a miracle. I was no longer a victim. I was a vessel of faith, a living testament to a divine promise. I was not falling alone. The man on the ground was named Javier. He was an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, a hard-working man with a quiet, unwavering faith. His days were a ceaseless cycle of physical labor, his body a well-worn instrument of survival. But his spirit was his sanctuary, a sacred space he filled with prayer and a quiet gratitude for the blessings he had received, no matter how small. He was finishing up his shift, sweeping up debris from the lower level of the pit, his movements a rhythmic, peaceful meditation. He was alone in the vast, empty space, and the silence was deep. Then, a sudden, quiet stillness descended over him. It was a silence deeper than the one he had just known, a stillness that was not the absence of sound, but a profound and absolute presence. And in the heart of that stillness, a voice, clear as a bell, spoke in his native tongue, his mother's tongue, the language of his heart, Mira Ariba, Javier. "Look up, Javier." The words were not a whisper or a shout. They were a simple, undeniable truth, a command that he did not question. He dropped his broom and looked up, his eyes scanning the rim of the pit. In the faint, diffuse glow of the work lights, he saw it. A small, elderly woman, my coat flying in the wind, was tumbling over the edge. It was a sight that defied all logic, a body in mid-air, a soul about to be extinguished. But he didn't stop to question it. The divine instruction had already been received, and his purpose was now crystal clear. He ran, scrambling over the rocky, uneven ground with a speed born of pure adrenaline. He dodged a massive metal beam, vaulted over a heap of jagged concrete, his body a blur of focused, desperate energy. He reached the wall just as I was about to hit the foundation, and with a lunge and a grunt of immense effort, he grabbed the handle of my coat. The sudden stop nearly tore the fabric from my body, but his grip was like iron. He pulled me to safety, and I collapsed onto the ground, my body trembling with shock, my heart still full of the profound peace I had felt in the fall. I looked up at him, my eyes filled with tears of gratitude. The man's face, etched with a quiet kindness, was a reflection of the divine grace that had saved me. But the moment was broken by a horrific, guttural shriek from above. Javier looked up and saw David, my son, stumbling backward in a frantic panic. He had seen the miracle, the sight of me being pulled from the brink of death, and in his moment of fear, he lost his footing. His own feet, once so steady and sure, slipped on the treacherous gravel, and he plummeted into the very abyss he had planned for me. The sound of his fall was a dull, sickening thud from the depths of the pit, a final, chilling punctuation mark on his monstrous act. The aftermath was a blur of flashing red and blue lights, the piercing wail of sirens, and the cold, efficient professionalism of the NYPD and the FDNY. The scene, once a quiet tableau of betrayal and divine intervention, was now a maelstrom of organized chaos. I sat on the ground, wrapped in a blanket a kind officer had given me, watching as the first responders descended into the pit with ropes and harnesses. Javier stood beside me, his presence a quiet comfort as he calmly explained everything to a detective. His voice, though soft, was clear and unwavering, and his account of the voice and the miraculous timing seemed to hold the grizzled detective's attention. The rescue of my son was a long, arduous process. He was entangled in the very rebar he had meant to use for his new buildings, his body a broken, pathetic figure among the twisted metal and shattered concrete. It took them over an hour to carefully extract him, using the jaws of life to cut away the steel that held him captive. He was rushed to the Mount Sinai Hospital with a massive spinal injury. The doctor, a compassionate man with a grave expression, took me aside and delivered the final, chilling diagnosis. "Your son has a severe spinal fracture, Mrs. Thomas," he said, his voice filled with a profound sadness. "He will never walk again." The words hit me like a physical blow. The very legs that had carried him to the edge of the abyss, the body he had used to try and destroy me, were now useless. He would spend the rest of his days confined to a wheelchair, a silent prisoner in his own body. The news was a sensation in the city, a story that spread like wildfire across every news channel and social media feed. The headline screamed with a morbid fascination: "Son pushes mother into construction pit, Queen's grandma saved by a miracle, real estate mogul's downfall." David, from his hospital bed, was charged with attempted murder. His once loyal investors and his business partners, hearing of his monstrous act, abandoned him. His company was bankrupt, his luxury apartment was foreclosed, and his lavish possessions were sold off to pay his debts. He was left with nothing but his broken body and the cold, unyielding reality of his own poetic justice. The foundation he had sought to build on my demise became his own tomb, a fitting punishment for a man whose ambition had consumed his soul. Today, I still live in my little brownstone. It's no longer just a house. It's a living testament to a miracle. Javier and I are now the best of friends, a bond forged in faith and fire. I used a portion of my pension to start a little scholarship in his name for the children of construction workers, a small act of gratitude for the life I was given. I visit David at the rehabilitation center. He is a shell of the man he once was, his face a mask of bitter, defeated resignation. I do not show him anger, I show him forgiveness. My forgiveness is not for him alone, but for me. It is a way of freeing my own heart from the bitterness that could have taken root. My life, which was nearly stolen, has been given back to me tenfold, not through vengeance, but through a divine intervention. If you are struggling with a similar betrayal, remember that your story is not over. You have the power to turn your pain into a platform for hope and healing. Be a beacon of light in your own darkness. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light in the darkness. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.